All right. Anyway, this is my teddy bear. Been with us for 15 years. Never taught a class without a friendly teddy bear face. All right. I see Scott is here. Thank you, Scott, for being here. I'll run to do this thing for a few minutes, actually about 10, 15 minutes. Cindy will be on as soon as we make sure she can be on, and set up some of our administrative rules. Not a whole big deal. Anyway, our whole focus here is appraisal innovation or modernization using open source solutions. And I say that right up front because guess what? The open source community has no marketing budget. The only way we learn about that is through each other's word of mouth. We focus on measuring markets instead of comparing comps. We select data with market-based methods rather than the old trust me, I'm an appraiser, I know a good comp when I see one type of thinking. That's a core part of data science, is objective methods of identifying data. It's not to get rid of the appraiser, it's to use the appraiser wisely. Sharpen your judgment through the use of the computer and visualization. Visualization is the connection between the computer and the human brain. My company name is valuemetrics.info. That's what we teach under, and we do integrate open source analysis into everything we do. I want to thank Scott for being here. I'm always nervous until my guests show up and I see Scott is actually here. And I go, oh, yes, I can always just turn it over to him and let him go. But okay, so how did this happen? Well, I went back to school after many years and took a whole bunch of classes of statistics, finance, econometrics primarily, computer programming, GIS. What I didn't know on my crazy agenda was that I was studying data science before data science had become a discipline of its own. It was kind of an accident. A few months ago, we had Lyle Radke here, so it's only fair we have Scott here today from Freddie Mac, but Lyle talked about bias and reproducibility in future appraisal products, and he certainly endorsed, can't use the word endorsed, liked the idea of evidence-based analysis. That's a big interest to him. Last month, we had Joan Trice, many of you know her. She does an excellent job on describing the incredible spaghetti bowl of appraisal regulatory systems. We've all suffered from it. And I, in particular, hate the fact that to teach one class across this country cost me about $7,000 to get approved in 50 states. It takes about 130 separate forms just to get one class approved across the country. So I appreciated her presentation there. Lyle Radke said just a few months ago, appraisers see their job as an art form. It's hard for them to rigorously explain exactly what they're doing. He did that at a group of mostly non-appraisers. And the feeling I got in the room was that they were kind of okay with that. They giggled and snickered a lot, but they were not anti-appraiser at all. And then another guy by the name of Scott Reuter said, appraisers need to spend time developing a market conditions analysis. Which was certainly a big motivation for me asking Scott to be here today, because that's a core part of what we teach in our stats, graphs, and data science classes. So I hadn't really talked to Scott closely on what he's going to talk about, but it really doesn't matter. And in addition to the importance of market analysis, I want to acknowledge that we have the new forms or quasi forms that just came out 3 days ago. So hopefully, Scott, you will cover that at least a little bit. And of course, the ever continuing ANSI measurement issue, which in my mind doesn't seem to be a big issue, but a lot of people think it is. I've been kind of doing ANSI for 20 years. Market conditions. So let's clarify the topic before we get Scott in here. And I want to kind of cover very briefly or fairly quickly on what we do in our classes that's related to this topic. So what are market conditions? Well, market conditions are price levels at a point in time for a specific market segment, not the economy in general, not the region, not a neighborhood, the market segment that's competitive. So what is the word rigorous that Lyle used? Well, it's thorough, accurate, precise, or strictly applied. So what is market analysis? It's a study of market conditions at a point in time and changes in the price levels over time. So at least we have a clear idea of what we're talking about here. Price indexing is what we teach in our classes, which is adjusting historical prices to current value. It's a very common concept in practically every other world except real estate appraisal for some reason. Adjustment. Why is modern analysis a critical need today? A number of reasons. One of which is that it's early in the sequence of adjustments. If you get the time adjustment right, a lot of other things fall in place. Any errors that you do make in time adjustments are going to bias results after that. It does affect every adjustment after that, and it's easy to do. Once you're set up and you've got your templates set up, what we teach, what we show, you'll very briefly see here in a minute, you can do in literally about 30, well, about a minute to 2 minutes, certainly less than 4 or 5 minutes. Once you understand what you're doing, you just push the button and off it goes. So today it's easy. It's reflected in current sales or as time adjustment sales. The change in conditions is what matters. So we're indexing historical sale prices to current value. Call it price indexing to current value. So what's required and what's happening? So let's compare what the Freddie Mac Seller Servicer Guide says versus what I've heard that Freddie Mac actually gets from originators. And you can change the word originators to appraisers. What does Freddie Mac actually get? And I've heard some scary stories. Maybe Scott will share those with us. This is right out of the Freddie Mac Seller Servicer Guideline. And Scott, I hope I'm not preempting some of your stuff. It'll hopefully just help along there. This is a direct quote right out of there. I copy pasted it on date of sale and time adjustments. The appraisal report must include time adjustments. You can't not do it. It's got to reflect changes in market conditions over the period analyzed. If your oldest comp is 6 months old, you don't analyze time changes over the last 1.5 years or 5 years, just over the relevant time period. It's got to be supported by comparables, the sales that are directly competitive, and you must explain what you've done. So there's 5 points of requirement from Freddie Mac. Very, very quickly, they're required. They reflect the change in conditions over time, over the right time period, supported by sales, and an explanation is required. So what's actually happening? How are appraisers handling change in price levels? And some of this I actually heard from what Freddie Mac said a few months ago, and what I've heard from the world out there, some of my reviewer friends. Some appraisers are faking it. They're checking the level market, but bracket it somehow, usually by finding one comp, which may or may not be comparable, but it brackets it, especially in those rapidly increasing markets. They use recent comps over more similar sales. That's a common solution. It makes sense, but if you got a really great comp that's 6 months old or a year old, you use that one and get a reliable time adjustment. So our goal, reflect the correct market, select the right time period, support by comparables, and explain the support. How about area regional trends? Does not qualify for those 4 categories. Find neighborhood pairs. Well, maybe pretty good, but if you've really ever genuinely tried to use pairs, you know how unreliable they are because there's a lot of variation in individual sale prices. The 1004MC, some of you probably know, I actually wrote 2 journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles in the appraisal journal on that very topic. It was bad. I don't know how else to put that. It had bad statistical analysis and bad grouping of data, and was capable of returning even wrong results in the wrong direction, much less the right amount. So what is the ideal method? Well, get the right market segment. What's actually competitive? It's got to be the right time period from competitive sales. It should provide a calculated results. Once you've got the data right, there's no probability left, no judgment left, no subjective element left. It's mathematics. So it can be calculated. And it's easy to explain using graphs, which is really the visualization is the tool the connecting tool between the power of the computer and the human brain through our eyes. We're very good at visualizing. We're very good at generalizing. And that's optimizing what the computer can help us with our judgment. With the data science method, we identify the directly competitive market segment. In our classes, we teach the 5 dimensions of similarity to reduce the problem into specific parts to make that more accurate. Property type, transaction, time, geography, and features. The graph we use is a scatter plot with time on the bottom axis and price on the y-axis, real straightforward. And we do a simple regression trend line on that. If you get the data right, that trend line is the time adjustment. And we'll show you an example of that just very quickly. So on the x-axis is time measured in days. On the y-axis is sale prices measured in dollars. So the result is dollars per day. And if your comp is sold 100 days ago, you just multiply the dollars per day times 100 and get a result. Once you learn how to do this, have your setup, it's very, very fast. Getting the right data is the key to it. Picking 3 comps is obsolete. When I became an appraiser, it was absolutely the only way to go. I could get that once I had that 4th or 5th good comp, I was done. I could take a deep breath. Today, I push a button. In 0.2 of a second, I've got all the competitive sales, or substantially all of them. Many times it's been said that appraisal is market analysis. As we say, it's not comparing comps, it's measuring markets. So the major step is getting all the relevant data, identify what's competitive within the let's say for residential example. The neighborhood would be all of the relevant data. From within that is competitive sales, which is not all the sales in the neighborhood. And we price index those sales that are competitive. We do our market conditions and time adjustment from those sales only. And then finally, we position the subject within that market segment. If we got the data right, the subject will be in the middle of that data set. It's visually very comforting. I'll show you an example of that in just a second. And deliver the enhanced data stream. And I believe the new forms are really moving in that direction strongly. Instead of delivering a piece of paper on a square, it's an enhanced data stream that can be further modified and interactively used by reviewers, underwriters, portfolio managers. So getting the data right is number 1. You decide the overall market model. The computer runs your overall search algorithm for whatever data source you use, usually MLS. And then you work with that data to make it better. It's kind of like confirming, verifying, but you do it earlier in the process rather than the last thing. Download all the neighborhood data, reduce to the competitive market segment. Just 5 slides here, and this is 5 slides covering 2 days of our class, by the way. Set up your templates for your downloads. Once you get that done, it's just very, very easy. There's an investment of time to get your templates right. This is a histogram. Talk about technology. Now, when I first started teaching this class, it was almost impossible to build a histogram using Excel or any other program out there. It was really, really clumsy. Over the years, it got easier. And today I can create a histogram like this in a spreadsheet in probably about 2 or 3 minutes. In R, I do it in about 2 or 3 seconds. R is the open source package that we talk about. So this is a histogram. It groups the sales by price out of this neighborhood. So there's one, see, this is the number of sales. So there's one sale that sold between 200,000 and 250,000. So how many sales sold between 250 and 300? When you go up here, and it was 5. So it shows you the distribution of sale prices in a particular neighborhood. I wanted to spend just a second on that so you're clear on what a histogram does. It shows the distribution of any data set, whether it's sale prices or living area or lot sizes or whatever. So with a very powerful tool, it helps us visually understand similarity. The pink stuff is your assignment data frame. Let's call it the neighborhood. Once you've selected it, here's the sales in the neighborhood. The blue or green is when you've controlled for the specific features like living areas. So here's the explanation. The red orange is your original selection of the neighborhood or all the data you think you'll ever need. In this case, it is the neighborhood. Once we control for the living area, this is a simple example, but you get the idea. 1,800 to 2,500 square feet. Let's assume that the subject property is 2,100 square feet. So this is the distribution of sales that compete with the subject property. And in a subject, we just put the little thing right there in the middle. And you know what? Visually, it is so satisfying and it's so clear and it's so difficult to challenge. And I hope, Scott, you're listening, because gosh darn, doesn't this help your underwriters, reviewers, and work with your lenders and originators? Price indexing, again, sale date on the bottom measured in days, and sale price on the y-axis. So each of those dots are all the sales in that neighborhood in the competitive market segment. The line is the least squares regression line. That takes about 1/10 of a second. You push the button, regress, and it's in there. And that line has a slope behind it, which is your dollars per day time adjustment. Easy, and it's definitive. And this is the old formula. You just plug it in, whatever your adjustment is. This was done during a period of about 20 years ago. Tremendous price increases that we had back then, just like we did a few months ago. You just multiply 28 days times $500 a day. I'm not going to do this demonstration in R, but we can come back to it after Scott is done and after the class is over with. We're happy to hang around, answer questions, and be much more informal. And I want to turn it over to Cindy for just a brief second before she turns it over to Scott. Thanks for listening to me.
Hey, everybody. You can hear me, right? Because I fixed my microphone and my headphones. So, okay, thank you. Yeah. The way we are going to do this, we have two moderators. We have Joe Lynch and we have Bruce Hahn. And I've directed everybody to ask their questions in the chat, and Bruce or to Joe. And then when we get to the question and answer time, then they'll do the questions. If anybody has any other particular questions, please reach out to me. I'm the host. So glad that y'all are here. And I want to turn it over to Scott Reuter. Scott, you're on.
Cindy,
Scott, introduce yourself. I had a sheet here to introduce you, but you do a better job. Hey, Scott's a great guy. I'll tell you that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I was going to joke if it went right from George to me, that I'm going to sign off. I learned everything I need to learn from listening to George. So my name's Scott Reuter. I'm the I'm the chief appraiser and single family director of valuation at Freddie Mac. And I'll spare you all the rest. I've been around a while. Been probably 35, 40 years in the industry, started as a fee appraiser. I hold a general certification. And after doing fee appraisal and field work, I went to work for mid-size Midwest bank in Ohio and kind of worked my way through various chairs and different companies on the bank side to Freddie Mac. So that's kind of the condensed version. But I really appreciate George and his team reaching out. I met George personally years ago at I think it was a CRN event, and I was impressed with George from the start. So I don't know what I'm going to add to this, but because I'm very impressed. I'm an appraiser, but I don't have a background in data science or applied math. But I think an article we wrote kind of resonated with George. We stay in touch anyway, but it was the importance of market analysis. And George reached out. That's going to be a great topic on a webinar. So I'm happy to join you here today. I do have a short slide deck I'll work through. George gave me a lot of license on what to present, so I'm going to just kind of cover some general topics, and then we'll get into the importance of market analysis really through the lens of what we saw the past few years with the markets as they were through the end of the pandemic to now. You can tell me if you see my slide.
I see it.
The screen, rather. Now I got to move this down because I can't get rid of this. So bear with me here for a hot second. Pull this down, go to slideshow from the beginning. There we go. So hopefully you can see that as well. So again, thanks very much to George for the kind invitation to join you here today. I look forward to adding hopefully a little bit of color to the broader topic. For a quick disclaimer, every effort, of course, is made to be accurate here today. George already beat me to the punch referencing some of our guide language from our seller servicer guide. So obviously we encourage you to reference our guide for any specificity around what's currently published around our policy to purchase the sale or service of mortgages. So a starting point to me seemed to be the time frame 2020 to 2021, highlighting the last 18 to 24 months that we all lived through. And I think the current market has been rather unprecedented. There are a number of macroeconomic trends that we track and follow to help gain insight on how various market characteristics create challenges for appraisers. And I'd like to start by touching quickly on three main trends that I believe are having and have had an impact. One is the sustained lower interest rates we saw through 2020, 2021. Two, the strong buyer demand against really lower housing inventory, all creating pressure on the third, which was really unprecedented house growth. This first slide is just a quick snapshot of mortgage interest rates and kind of a historical trending. As you see from our Freddie Mac market survey, displays a weekly average for mortgage rates against a 50-year look back. This is kind of from late last year. And I know rates have ticked up a little bit since, but I wanted to really display the impact of the last 50 years. And really, even though there's been some change, there's been some movement up and down, not unlike a stock ticker, but it has really been kind of a trend all the way down to historic low rates for where we're at now. Again, even with the current uptick, low mortgage rates, at least as long as I've been in the business, which is a fair amount of this graph, low mortgage rates have always correlated to really helping support a strong housing market. Fun fact, my first year in the business, I think, was the highest peak there right around 1983. So it's been on a little bit of a slow decline since then. The other slide that we update and track month over month is the impact on appraiser capacity and volume. 2021 timeframe, as you can see on the right, really we saw record UCDP appraisal submissions with monthly totals surpassing 700,000 appraisals. The amber kind of horizontal line running across the graph is the static kind of amount of appraisers. It's the total hard count of licenses of appraisers we see submitting work to Fannie and Freddie. The UCDP portal is the Uniform Collateral Data Portal. It's a shared portal between the enterprises. So this is a combination of Fannie and Freddie work. If you've seen the graph before, we update this monthly on our appraiser webpage. I'll provide George and Cindy a link to some resources which you can circle back around and feel free to use. But it displays a couple of things. One is the lower dark vertical blue bars represent the hard count of the purchase volume going back probably eight plus years. And then the lighter blue bars stacked on top of that represent the refinance volume. And this slide was actually generated first in 2016 by Sean Murphy on our team. And we were hearing a lot of chatter back in 2016. You can see that time period in here, where that was when the chatter of the appraiser shortage started to kind of come up. Oh my God, there's not enough appraisers, and particularly out west and the Cal states, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, all the little things we were hearing. So we circled up inside of Freddie and said, we have to either myth bust or confirm this. And we did this analysis. So we did see that it was beginning to put pressure on and kind of burst through the capacity line for appraisers. So it was a real thing. In late 2016, migrating to 2017, it kind of normalized, and the trend, you can see the pressure as it went against the trend. It started to peak up again in 2019. And then who with a straight face would admit going into a 100-year pandemic, we'd see the 2020, 2021 timeframe, which just absolutely was was crushing volume across the spectrum, and appraisers kind of right in the middle of it. We've got some other stats and graphs here I won't dwell on. This was the kind of the state by state view on a heat map 2021, the average GSE appraisals per appraiser, hard count through the states for each state through the end of 2021. And it was just well beyond thresholds we had seen. And I think all of that had an impact on the record house price growth we saw through that same time period. So this is a view from 2020 to really what we're seeing in the markets related to home price growth. And the HPI continues to rise nationwide. And what we see in these numbers, it really tells the story of what we all lived and continuing to live from the past 2 years to now. And I draw your attention to the right side of the graph. The main takeaway here is that the index rose to over 18% around mid 2021, noting the acceleration in price growth from early 2020 to that peak. And then I think one of the things George and I actually communicated on was some of the tracking we do on the share of low appraisals or appraisals that come in below contract price. So this slide, as an appraiser, this slide means a lot to me because, like many of you, I lived this. So it's one of the key indicators, again, is tracking the monthly share of appraisals that are submitted below contract. This slide, I think, goes back to around 2015 and represents what kind of a normal trend looks like. Again, similar to the appraiser capacity slide, you see the seasonality that's very common in the purchase market, with a trend of low appraisals kind of in the late spring to early summer months that typically would peak at around 8 to 10%. Sometimes in appraiser parlance, this is thinking of using winter comps into the early spring. The spring market hasn't really gotten a lot of traction yet, so you're coming out of the winter. Generally takes a few months to come up. That's kind of the old thinking, and we would see that, and then it would eventually kind of normal out. But as you see, in late 2020, the distribution really never normalized. It just kept rising, and in 2021, it spiked to record highs, reaching over 20% in April and May of the year. And coming into July, things cooled off a little bit. You can see the decline, but markets are still relatively very hot and still continue to trend above normal thresholds. So a second view of the macroeconomic trends and some of the things we look at through 2022. So the update, interest rates, again, beginning to slightly slow. So they're slowly increasing. Low housing inventory, I think, still plagues a lot of markets nationwide. And price growth is anticipated to be kind of around 10% to the mid-teens. So as we migrate into 2020, we have that trending, again, still low, but up a little bit. Housing supply remains depleted, and low inventory is anticipated to continue to fuel house price appreciation in and around the mid-teens. Our next slide is from our deputy chief economist, friend of mine, Len Kiefer. Actually posted this on LinkedIn. It caught my eye, and I said, "Hey, can I share that?" He said, "Sure." So we're beginning to track some of that increase, that modest increase in rates, and it's really starting to have an impact on refis. So again, even though it may, and on the capacity slide, you were seeing the trend come back down to what might be kind of in balance, we're just now in March. So we're getting ready to see whatever our normal seasonal or spring market might look like as we get in a little deeper into the spring. So for rapidly changing markets, this is kind of like so what are appraisers really to do? And I began to hear a lot of frustration in 2020 on a variety of different meetings and directly from appraisers. There's no way we can support these contract prices. And since markets and sales and closed sales transactions typically lag, they do present problems for appraisers. Now, again, I don't have a degree in applied math. As I said, I'm not a data scientist. I don't have George's level of knowledge. We have people at Freddie Mac that smarter than me in data and data science and analytics, but I do know that there are ways that appraisers could be, and should be addressing these concerns. And that was really the premise behind the piece, I think, that caught George's eye. And there are a lot of things you can do, not only just trends in listing prices. There's a difference between the contract and closing date, which appraisers can capture. Contract to list ratio kind of gives you an idea of pending sales in a certain market. That can be a metric. And again, we highlighted a lot of these: exposure time, marketing time, and you can even grab new construction patterns in markets. That can also be a way to indicate really what's going on in these markets. As for appraiser behavior, and this is not across the board, I think in general, I think appraisers do a nice job, and many do develop market conditions adjustments and really do the analysis. I think the sad reality is just as many, maybe more, don't. And it's problematic, and it creates a lot of problems. And some of the couple of highlights in what we were seeing was that the amount of time appraisers were making this adjustment, even trying to develop a market conditions or time adjustment, was maybe 20–25% of the time. And appraisers appear to be very conservative even when they were developing the adjustment. We saw a report we read, I think, from our review team, and the appraiser actually had done the analysis and said something to the effect that, yeah, the market conditions here are rising 10–12%, but I'm going to apply a 5% adjustment. So it just, the light bulb or the bell went off, or whatever the right analogy is. It's like when you start messaging to appraisers that, to George's point with his early graphic, it's in our guide that require appraisers to do this and do it and document it. And if I were back in the fee appraiser seat in the field, I would do it. I'd try to learn from somebody like George. There's other educators out there that are doing it. I'd put it in the report. I'd put it in my work file, for crying out loud. Appraisers are gun shy about, and I know they've had a tough road with the crisis and getting called when markets, are rising or declining, and they're being aggressive with these market conditions adjustments like they should be. Put it in your work file, document it in your report, document it in your work file. A well-documented work file, I've said many times, is an appraiser's best friend. I was with a large bank in the 08, 09, 10 period. I was with them actually almost 10 years, but I saw the pressure that appraisers who had a lot of their work revisited by the GSEs who were pushing back on the buybacks with the bank. And at an appraiser level, the ones that had the most uncomfortable time didn't have a work file or were hustling to put one together, and it typically would go poorly. And so I also get it when we're busy, and that earlier graph indicates we've all been busy. We're crazy busy, but that does not mean that, please spend the requisite time, even if you're documenting a virtual file. Just make sure that documentation is in there, is captured somewhere. So anyway, we saw appraisers mostly did not make an attempt to do this. When they did, they were very conservative. They tended to either make conservative adjustments or make the right adjustment and then offset somewhere else. Like we've collectively, I'll put myself, it's like we've beaten this dog so much through all the QC and the underwriter and the lender back and forth, that the appraisers have just, by and large, developed the behavior that they just want to be right down the middle of the road and not excessive on either side. But if the market is demanding aggressive, or the market is excessive, I think that's really, what we need to be developing by the market conditions analysis and representing in reports. Second point here is we also believe, and as an appraiser, I feel a lot of this upward movement, it's acceptable to reflect this in the final reconciliation of value. We always don't have to be midpoint. I was tickled George had a slide on, some of the behavior that, let's find that high comp no matter what, and then I can bracket. And that's just one of the other, 15 and 25%, and bracket the comps. And, I can't think of them all now, but all the little rules of thumb that we kind of have in our mind, that if you are doing the work and you're doing the analysis and you can document and support it, it's the absolute, terra firma. So, for some of these markets nationwide, I think the average price in the country, the average home is somewhere in the $300,000 range. And I used it as an example, if you take that 18% that was on a previous graph, you take that same annual increase, the math works pretty well over 12 months. That's 1.5 points a month. So if you're in a market and you get a comparable sale 2, maybe 3 months old with no other extenuating circumstance, that's a great comp. And you might not be inclined up with your stickers of 15 and 25 and all the other old, rules of thumb. You might not adjust a comp that's maybe 3 months old. And we're trying to beat the drum and say, absolutely adjust that comp 3 months old, because 3 months at 1.5 points, 4.5% against $300,000 sale, I think that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 13, 14,000 you're able to support by virtue of making a time or market conditions adjustment. And it's my understanding now that, and I was out of the market before a lot of this as a fee appraiser, and as a lot of this new functionality came on the scene, that with the import functionality with MLS and a lot, this is not, even to George's example, if you're setting up your own method to do it, it's not terribly difficult to do. And it sounds like the majority of the work is in setting up the template and understanding how to do it. And then once you get that heavy lifting done, then you can be supporting and really applying well-supported adjustments. Kind of coming towards the end here, a lot of our industry messaging, just to reinforce, I'll provide links to our webpage and some of the other resources we make available to appraisers. We've tried to be very aggressive out there, not only just in rising markets. I think we framed it as rapidly changing markets, because a lot of these fundamentals you can use when markets are also on the decline. So you do your client just as much of a disservice if markets are rapidly declining. You got that same lag in comparable sales data, and you're giving them, you're not adjusting comps that are 2, 3, 4 months old when maybe an inflated value. So overvaluation and undervaluation are flags and concerns for lenders, banks, and also for the enterprise, certainly for Freddie Mac. We messaged pretty aggressively with some of the problems that our home builder friends and new home construction are suffering. Rising lumber building materials cost is a real thing, and I know appraisers are struggling with it, and there are analytic and math solutions to that as well. We tied and wrote one article about a cost approach, encouraging appraisers to, just because our guide doesn't require it, we only require it on manufactured homes. But again, I was kind of evangelizing that, develop a cost approach if you're having trouble as well. A cost approach is a market-based approach, and it's a way to at least begin to provide some additional analysis, and you're developing a second approach to value that can maybe help you with your first approach to value. It can't be the only basis for value. You can't just decide to develop a cost approach and then have an appraisal sold to Freddie Mac. We need a sales comparison or market approach to demonstrate the marketability, but it can go a long way. Now, I say that to say sometimes it's easy for us to say, sitting high in the building at Freddie Mac. And I've said publicly before too, I tried to put my money where my mouth was last year for my own continuing education, and not, we always get up against the gun with typically with our deadlines, but I tried to be very thoughtful and plan ahead and take courses that were going to be meaningful. So 7-hour cost approach. I think I did a 4-hour on ADUs. They're a hot topic, and I forget the other two, but the point is I was trying to really also get out there and make sure I understood what I'm so comfortable talking about. And that's another part of the messaging to appraisers, is just say, look, challenge yourself. This is really where we're going to separate ourselves. I think, we're going to add value where they need some level of analysis and data analytics. It's the reason, a lot of the waiver activity and automation is stepping in. Where our offices sit, as an example, in Northern Virginia, if you go west straight out the Dulles Airport, I've learned, I'm not native to the area, but I've learned that's called the Dulles Corridor. So along that corridor, you've got Reston and Oakville, you got all these areas where they were built probably somewhere between the 60s and the 80s with, a lot of similarity, not unlike other parts of the country. A lot of townhomes. Some of those have thousands of townhomes that are attached, and the only thing you need to solve is if you're an interior unit or an end unit, and they rapidly trade. They sell very frequently. So I've talked to our modeling econometrics and data and analytic team, and they said, look, models can do a pretty good job when you've got that level of homogeneous properties and that frequent of sales data. Where they're going to struggle is when the market conditions are rapidly changing, when the property types are complex or unique, where the data is more heterogeneous. They're going to struggle, and they're going to need appraisers. So anyway, it ties back to, I think that's part of a broader message out to the industry of where we think, where I certainly think appraisers need to be focusing their time. And I think I touched on these last items just in terms of some examples on, refining and actually doing a thorough market conditions analysis, repeat sales, time adjustments, and looking for other metrics that the market might be providing you. And I think that's all I have on prepared material. So George, I'd be eager to have you, Bruce, Joe, anyone kind of jump in, and I'd like to make this as interactive as possible.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, Cindy's kind of in charge of this part, and we've had Bruce and Joe that help kind of screen the questions for us. I do want to acknowledge that there's so many friends on here, but I certainly want to, John Ferris is a strong member of our community of asset analysts, strictly residential. One of the smartest residential appraisers in terms of technology, I know. Charlie Abramitis here from London, Ontario, in Canada, is my mentor in data science and using R&R Studio. Sean Murphy's here. Craig Gilbert, raise your hand. Craig has done a webinar or two with me and assisted many times. Lee Stidell, who got me a job teaching at San Diego City College years ago. And Danny Wiley's here, an old friend of mine, and Bill King, who'll probably be doing a webinar with us in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy and let her field the questions. Thank you, Scott.
I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and Joe and let them start asking the questions.
I'll start with one real quick and let Joe do the next. Good question here from Craig Gilbert. Does Freddie Mac's AVM seem to do a better job of analyzing price indexing than most appraisers?
I'm glad I have Danny Wiley and Sean Murphy on the line. They're the experts at Freddie Mac, more on the automated side. Look, I think there's places the models are strong and places the appraisers are strong, and I don't know that I really want to comment which is better. I think anytime you're analyzing big sets of data and you're using automation and the sophistication that our meta team brings, that's clearly going to be noteworthy.
Okay, so Bruce and everyone else, I have one question so far from John Ferris. To what degree does underwriter influence contribute to low appraisals in rapidly changing markets, because they frequently will question a value if there isn't a closed sale price that's higher than the contract price?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, John. I think we tried to touch on that, and we don't, we're downstream of a lot of the activity that goes on, at the lender, AMC underwriting, time period. We hear anecdotally that there is still that pressure, and, underwriters like appraisers come in all different shapes and sizes. So you may have some that just, will work off a check sheet and be hitting the appraiser that, you can't do this and you can't do that. My line that, your work file is your best friend came from Mr. Wiley. And I think that is really I think a tenet of something appraisers can and should really lean on. I think you do your analysis, you try to have the conversation. Sometimes we appraisers are not great about having those outbound conversations and that interaction. And if they dig in, I think you have something you can fall back on. But maybe tying back to your question, John, I don't really have a clear read on how it influences, but I have to think through some of the behaviors, some of the developmental market behaviors we see in the appraisers' evidence in their reports, that some level of it has to exist.
Scott, if I could ask a follow-up.
Sure, Joe.
Is there any education that Fannie or Freddie or anyone else provides to underwriters regarding appraisers and appraiser issues? You know, it'd be great to see classes for underwriters to help them understand what we do better.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things, and it's a great point. So we have a formal training arm that that actually stands up training across the enterprise. So in the single family space, they're very aggressive with at least making some of that content available to our lender clients. We have very aggressive client relations and client communication teams and customer advisory boards. And there are a lot of platforms, not saying we can't always do better, but we are not silent to that and blind to that. That's very important. And it's an attempt to get to that point, that pinch point, which I think John hit on, and I think the follow-up hits on that. You know, a lot of this happens or either doesn't happen in that underwriter appraiser interaction. And, you know, you hope in your heart it's not, appraisers aren't steering behavior and not being aggressive or excessive on comparable on market conditions adjustments when they need and should be, and a variety of other examples, just because there's been a learned behavior. But again, you know, we try to be as aggressive as we can, and it's largely what my role is devoted to. We have Danny, we have Sean, we have a lot of other people that we pull away from their day job to make sure we're messaging, and as well as a whole Marcoms, that's marketing communications and PR team that's dedicated to it. So anyway, it's a long way to say, yes, we are trying, but I said all that to say, you know, maybe I'm not guaranteeing there's not a blind spot or opportunities we can improve.
It'd be real nice if you guys would continue to get the word out that the 1004MC is not useful, and maybe reference George's article about that, because I still have clients asking for that on a daily basis.
I'll take that back. I think, yeah, I think that, you know, I was in the room in Nashville, Tennessee at the Appraisal Institute conference when it was announced first by Fannie, and then we followed that it wasn't a form that was retired, but it would be a form that would not be required. And so I appreciate the appraiser sentiment. And then following to that, we heard a lot of feedback from lenders that we're still requiring because they actually like the analysis. So certainly take it to heart, and we'll take it back in, but thank you.
Scott, I have a question from Brad, who says he's a review appraiser mostly, and a lot of reports that he sees, appraisers, I'm assuming, he infers here they're doing some market conditions analysis, but they do not adjust for sales that occurred within 0 to 60 days. And he wants to know if he should tell clients or lenders that the market conditions are not done correctly when an appraiser overlooks sales like that.
Yeah, I mean, all markets are different, I guess, is my first reaction. And that's, you know, to George's intro, which I loved. You know, he kind of broke down our requirement by the components in your market. I told the anecdote, my daughter bought a home in the middle of last year with her fiance, and they were moving to West Lafayette, Indiana. Not, I love Indiana, but not a traditional, you know, it's like Southern California hotspot. The first day of looking at homes, they had 4 appointments set and 2 homes sold while they were in the car. So, I mean, appraiser says, well, I don't make it if it's less than 60 days. Well, there's a market that's not only changing by the month, maybe not by the week, maybe by the day. I mean, so, you know, there's certain periods where it's almost silly to have these rules of thumb. But yeah, I don't have a gem for our chief appraiser friend who wants a comeback, but I would just reinforce that by saying, look, all markets are different, and the appraisers have to measure it, whether it's happening by the year, the month, the week, or the day.
Scott, I've had a couple people ask me about this. With Fannie Mae rolling out the new measurement standard, they're wondering if Freddie Mac is going to get on board also.
Yeah, I'm not really in a position to publicly comment on that right now.
I have a question from Barry. He says, since 1986, market value has been the most probable price, which has been interpreted as near the middle of the adjusted price range. In a rising market, should reconciliation be closer to the highest adjusted price?
Yeah, again, I would fall back to, and I open this up to other appraisers on a call too, who have vast knowledge. I would say, to me, I understand that, but I think in rapidly fluctuating, rapidly increasing markets, your most probable price might be at the high end of the range. So again, I've heard from appraisers over the years who, you just have to trust us when we do the analysis. Well, here we're trusting you, right? I mean, make your case, kind of. And that's not being flip. It's just, I think it's there. If it's there in the data and you can make the case and support it and defend it, then I think absolutely, I would use every avenue that I thought I could, was on terra firma, right? If I thought I had solid footing, I would, develop and utilize the supported adjustments. If I felt like I, again, the example of the 1.5 over 3 months, that helps get you there. If adjusting to the high end of the range, if that's what the market's indicating on markets where you can't keep a listing more than a day. I mean, these are all, there's metrics there that the appraiser can grab and utilize to, be able to reflect what's going on in that market.
Todd asks, what does the level of performing versus non-performing loans look like? And is there a backlog that was created during the forbearance period? In other words, should we expect an influx of REOs moving forward because they were not allowed to exist for a period of time?
I don't know. I didn't bring that data today. Sorry.
A good question from Edward. And he's asking if George could speak to this, but I think it's a very good question. When a competitive market segment data may not support market conditions adjustment within the past 3 months compared to the previous time period, say the past 4 to 12 months, which do show an increase. I think he's referring to changing market conditions here. You want to comment on that, George, or maybe Scott wants to as well?
Well, I can, but my answer always gets too complicated. Basically, how far back in time you go is really important. And if the part of the issue is, do you have enough data? Well, sometimes you can expand to indirectly competitive sales by expanding your data set, but it's got to be done in an organized manner. You don't just arbitrarily expand it. And then in my class, we certainly give a couple examples of how you actually fit the curve to the market. It could be a polynomial curve, or one outstanding example we have in the class is a spline linear, where the market's going up for a while, then it's going down for a while. So it's still a dollars per day adjustment, but you do it twice.
Susan asks, who will be able to modify appraisals downstream in the interactive era?
I may need more. What does she mean modify, like post-delivery?
This is George. Let me try to answer that. I think that once we get into a modified, when the appraiser is delivering a modified data stream, we will still deliver a result. Now, maybe more than just a point value 2 weeks ago. It may be a fundamental value, what they call a sustainable value. It could be a range. It can be a forecast 30 days out, 90 days out, a year out, like relocation appraisers do. But I think what will happen is it will clarify that very line that Susan asked about, is when is it an appraisal, when is it an underwriting decision? And those two have been intermeshed in an uncomfortable way in the past. And by providing the information, okay, for example, delivering an interactive data stream with an interactive dashboard to the underwriter. Today, the underwriter says, well, why didn't you use this comp? Well, suddenly you're in a 2-week process to get an answer and everybody's irritated. With a dashboard and a map, the underwriter can simply click on that one data point and get an instant answer. And they can make their decision based on their reviewed results or modified results, or go back to what the appraiser did. And it's clear on why that data point was included or not.
Yeah, I'll add real quick to that too, George. You mentioned it in your opening remarks. I think that's the beauty of the UAD redesign, is that we're developing a new data set and a data standard, not developing a new static form. So it will enable all of this. George talked about, 3 comps and done. Danny frequently uses 3 comps and a cloud of dust, which I love. And, that was the old fashioned way. And I think now we're going to be able to not only utilize and have appraisers interact with larger data sets, but have all that data present. Maybe George, to your example.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me?
That was a comment.
Somebody help me, I didn't get it. Bruce? Anybody was listening besides me not listening?
He was saying nice things about you.
Oh, no, not that. Well, I hope, I should have warned you that we have a tough crowd here.
Bruce and Joe, do you have any more questions before I tell everybody they can unmute themselves? Just raise your hand to ask a question.
I've got a couple more.
Okay.
John Ferris, once again, 2 questions. I know we've talked about this in prior webinar, but there needs to be a little pressure on application providers to calculate daily adjustments, not just monthly. So that's a dig at total. Second, and maybe education for underwriters who question why I'm making dollar adjustments instead of percentage. So John, I can speak to my experience. I've been doing dollar adjustments for more than 10 years. And I had one comment, hey, that's really cool. I like the way you did that. And I've had no other comments from anyone about doing daily dollar adjustments. So maybe I just have a better set of clients than you.
I can comment on that. The main reason people have asked for percentage adjustments, number one, is because we're used to it historically as human beings. We see things in percentage terms, but also all of the forms software providers ask for a percentage term. As far as I know, all of the software providers, partly at my pushing, I know starting with Wayne Pugh, an old friend of mine, immediately converted over to where you could do dollars per day. And if the reader wants the percentage, they can get it. It's just dividing. It's just dividing. It's not a big deal.
So Scott, you already talked about rising interest rates. I'm curious if you have a comment, and you may not, about liquidity and what factor it might play in where we go from here as it relates to market conditions. It seems to me that liquidity sometimes has as big an impact as interest rates. That is, when credit becomes less available. Is that a fair question?
That's a great question, but I think it's better positioned for one of our economists. I'm not trying to sidestep it, Bruce. I just think, yeah, the data in the intro was more just to set up. We're great at trailing indicators on a lot of things, including the economic trends, and we're a little weaker on what we think is going to happen. So I think that's a little outside my lane.
Okay, so I'm going to unmute or allow everybody to unmute themselves. If you have something that you want to ask or comments you want to make, raise your hand. You'll go to the top of the list and we'll call on you.
This is George. I remembered what I was going to talk about.
Get in line.
I needed to mention Bob Parson, an old dear friend of mine who passed away just a few months ago. Formerly worked for Freddie Mac, I believe. Was the chief appraiser at OCC for many years. And one of the legacies he left me with was a belief that appraisers are the best position to deliver more than just a point value opinion 2 weeks ago. We can deliver other products that are absolutely needed. Risk analysis. I mean, what Scott and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and banks, they really need risk analysis, not a point value 2 weeks ago, an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. They need real analysis. And the focus is on risk, reliability, not an opinion. And that's where the major motivational change for technology. So I just wanted to honor him and thank him for his influence in my life in this area.
Cindy, I do have a question for Scott.
Okay.
Is there anything about desktop appraisals that you'd want to mention to this group?
I think we need a whole nother webinar. No, I think desktop appraisals, it was, Freddie went live, I think March 6th, and I think our friends across the river, as we say, are going live with desktop tomorrow. And it was the development of the form, and the announcement was joint through our regulator with Fannie. I would just say, I think we view this as a big step in appraisal modernization, but more transitional over time. And I think depending on who you talk to, we talk to a lot of lenders and AMCs, and there's a lot of chatter on the blogs and in the community right now around some stirred up confusion about desktop. And really, from our point of view, it's very straightforward. Go to our website. It's another resource I'll provide George. We've got some great resources, some FAQs and some talking points and guidance around how to do a desktop appraisal. But I would say, from an appraiser's point of view, if you're developing a desktop assignment, there's certain things you have to do. And they're a little bit different if you did some desktop work for the GSEs through the COVID period. There were appraisal flexibilities that were set up during COVID, but that were slightly different. There were mitigating circumstances during the pandemic. And to make desktop available permanent guide, there were a couple changes. Most on the call, if you're following this at all, know that the new item or the new piece of information that we're introducing is the requirement for a floor plan. And this was very strategic. So the high level thought is the appraiser is not going in the property, so you don't know the layout. So it helps with that, number one. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, it helps an appraiser understand, without going into that property, the relationship of the GLA as they begin to break down and calculate the square footage. So there's markets where you have split levels, some are above grade, some are below. A lot of markets have basements that are commonly finished. Realtors, you may have county agents that roll all that square footage in. The appraiser really needs to know the relationship for that. So that's kind of the why behind the ask now. But having said that, that's causing a lot of immediate, visceral, short-term reaction that, oh my God, this floor plan is really not available. And what do we need to do? So, our response is the view of this, the spirit of this was not to add cost, add time, add an additional workforce or anybody to go source this. It's either available or it's not. Understanding that this may take time to be adopted more widely in the industry, and that's kind of the simple off the cuff statement. I would say if appraisers get these assignments, if you do have the ability or access to a floor plan through the listing, maybe it's a somewhat newer home and you maybe have access to get on the builder website to get the floor plan, that would be great. Just be mindful that that's not the only piece of information we need. I think the downside with the floor plan kind of getting all the attention is that the feeling is that's the only thing that appraisers need to do from a sketch perspective, and they don't. They need a floor plan showing the layout, a sketch of the dwelling showing exterior measurements, and the GLA calculations. So my additional comment would be with some of the technology, which I'm very bullish on, a lot of the emerging tools and tech, a lot of this technology can merge all three of those into one output. And we've seen some of that. We're starting to see some of the desktop appraisals be submitted to Freddie Mac. So that's great. Some appraisers are right on it. We're also seeing kind of a mixed bag. We're seeing where appraisers are getting tripped up, where they put in the floor plan and then they move on, and then they miss the sketch and with dimensions and the calculations. We're also seeing, there's a photo requirement, which the reason these have been, I think, in part isolated for eligibility on the purchase transaction was the feeling is somewhere north of 90–95%. Most listings nationwide, or there's a lot of online information about properties that are being marketed for sale. So the feeling is there would hopefully be a lot of those resources that are also available to the appraiser. That was one thing that was evidenced that we saw through some of the COVID work that we monitored. But there again, appraisers just need to be really clear. We've got some good resources. I got to shout out our friends at Fannie. They've got some good resources. So I would encourage you to go out. So, an appraisal we saw recently, appraiser was doing a great job, but you got to the photo page, you had a front picture, it was a newer home or brand new home, I forget. Front photo of the home, back photo rear photo empty, photo unavailable, street scene, photo not available. So that's not acceptable, right? That would not be in compliance. So just mindful of that, right there. The feeling is through the Google aerial, Bing they have bird's eye view, a lot of functionality on the online sources can maybe the appraiser can utilize to get those photos, or if just look to see if they are available somewhere else. But anyway, I kind of blended a lot in there, but if there's any questions about desktop, we'll be happy to field, whatever you might have, at least to the degree we've had a run with them here for a few weeks, what the spirit and the intent of the introduction of desktop was, and kind of why we're bullish about it, and a reminder that maybe broadly to the industry, we're not done innovating, right? I think a lot of that confusion also is the burden of all appraisal innovation and modernization seems to be put right on the shoulders of this desktop product, and that was not really the intent. So I appreciate in my heart market forces at work and the desire to have some consistency and reliability, and for the marketers and purveyors of all the technology, they're eager to get them out there. And this is the first time the GSEs have kind of cracked the door open and they see a little stream of light and they're charging for it. I would just say, just take a deep breath. You saw the many-year look back. I know we're coming off of a couple of years of just unprecedented housing volume that absolutely, really crushed a lot of appraisers. And that set aside the work that didn't go to appraisers. I mean, I can't imagine an environment where the 1004 Form 70 was the only tool we had. So anyway, just kind of collecting my thoughts, but those are some quick thoughts on desktop, and I'd be more than happy to entertain questions if there's something I missed or you have an additional question or two.
I have a specific question about desktop, Scott. I've not done them yet, but who is responsible for providing the floor plan and the sketch that's appropriate for use with the desktop? Is that a lender responsibility? Is that an appraiser responsibility? So I have no experience with it, and I don't know if I want to jump in until I understand what the rules are, and whether I'm responsible for that or someone else.
So this is, I think, it's a good question, Joe, and I think it's the first point of confusion. We don't prescribe or require any party to source it at all, and that's not
Okay.
it's just that's not a requirement that go get it if it's not there. Our system will flag, like we do for an ACE waiver, will indicate desktop eligible. So we'll indicate if a purchase transaction, if we've got enough data and the characteristics of the loan fit, the lender will get the indication that it's desktop eligible. That to us does not mean desktop mandatory. So that doesn't mean figure it out, go get it from somewhere up to and including the appraiser. All of our published material and FAQs don't point to that. We say instead, appraiser can get that from anywhere he or she deem can, as long as they can verify it. If it comes from technology, if it comes from a listing agent, if it comes from somebody. But our vision is not that the appraiser now, for this desktop appraisal, which was designed to be more efficient and help with lower turn time, to now have one more burden that they have to go out and source this information. It's kind of like the industry's trying to make a hybrid out of a desktop, right?
Right.
Hybrids, I can't speak for Fannie Mae, but for Freddie, we're still testing them and piloting them, and that's a whole different form. That's a whole different workflow. That's a different product. But I think that question feels like it comes from a sincere place, but out of that confusion of, okay, I'm getting this request. Now, what do I do? Where do I get it? You don't have to do anything. If the appraiser makes the determination whether or not they can fulfill the assignment with the information they can glean from their desktop or not. Now, I'm gaining an appreciation from talking to many appraisers that sometimes that's easy for us to say. And I said, well, you don't understand. We either have pressure to fulfill the assignment as it is, or it's not as easy as saying, I'm going to upgrade, or, you have to cancel the assignment and get it back. They're worried they might not get it back. It touches off a whole series of things that I want to appreciate and understand from an operational perspective. But again, I guess tying all the way back, that's not the intent. And to your question, there's no prescribed instructions on who's to get that and how they're to get it.
So if it's not available, then the appraiser can immediately raise their hand and say, this isn't going to work, and let's upgrade it to full inspection.
Now, I will say parenthetically, we have some parallel conversations going on across the industry, including our realtor friends. And our agent friends have been very open to, this dialogue. And as these become more commonplace, think of a world if this became something that realtors, even as a best practice, or it became more common for them just to add a floor plan, that would be great. How many times were we all confounded when you're out trying to, you're looking at your comparable sales and the data, and particularly square footage, might be all over the place. If you're blind to the layout of that home, that would be helpful. So, and they are becoming more commonplace. I'm not going to pretend that they're everywhere, but they are becoming more commonplace in a lot of markets. So hopefully they will become more common. And as they do, I think we'll begin to see more of an uptake on the desktop, and maybe during those, the capacity slide during busy times really help ease some of the capacity burden on existing appraisers, one. And it could be something they integrate in their practice that they, it could be part of the work they do. During COVID, these came back first. We've monitored month over month always the inflow of appraisals, and the desktop work always got returned first, kind of suggesting to us that it was a good thing. Like appraisers were, okay, I can knock this out at my desk. And we kind of hope that same spirit carries over now that they're permanent in guide. And again, maybe with some more time, we can see a much higher execution rate.
Okay, so unless Bruce has a couple, I do have a couple more follow-ups.
I have another one.
Okay.
Can you speak, Scott, to anything about the new form that might be coming with particular consideration to interior and exterior condition segmentation and how that might be handled with the new form?
The new UAD?
I believe that's what they're asking about. Yes.
I'm going to put my friend Sean Murphy on the spot. Sean, are you comfortable coming off mute? And I'd be way outside my lane there, my friend, trying to talk with a lot of detail.
Sure, I don't mind speaking. This is Sean Murphy, Freddie Mac. We do have information on our website. I realize it's going to be multiple years before this comes out. So we are working on that, and that design is going to be, we'll be coming more public with it as we go further throughout the year. Right now, we're still working on the specs for it, but in general, we will be having an interior condition rating, an exterior condition rating, and same with quality. There will be a quality interior rating and an exterior one as well. That will be very much similar to what everyone's familiar with, the C1s through C6s and the Q1s through Q6s. They're really going to be very similar to what everybody's used to, but we'll be getting a little more detail about what's on the inside versus what's the outside.
Hey, Sean, I've seen a complaint about the new forms that they just have a checkbox for highest and best use still, and that's a point of irritation to appraisers. Is that something that at this early stage we can get fixed?
Well, we've actually gotten into greater detail about the highest and best use. We're getting the 4 tests to the highest and best use, and we're allowing the appraiser to comment on each of the 4 tests within the appraisal. Granted, if the appraiser is not going to comment much on it, there won't be too much displayed, but I'm not sure who was complaining about that. They may have seen a sample that was very sparse in just the sense that samples are. We're just trying to show a general concept of what's going on. But I think most people will be pleased that the highest and best use has been expanded on the new UAD to allow for all 4 tests.
Well, that sounds like good news then. So another desktop question. How should an appraiser working on a desktop verify the floor plan?
I'm going to answer, and then I'm not going to put Danny Wiley on the spot, but I am going to put him on the spot if he wants to add anything that I've missed. But I look at that as, we look at that as a piece of information, and they can verify it how they verify anything and everything else in that assignment. Cross compare photos. They can talk to an agent. They can talk to someone to try to get a verification. They may have a previous appraisal or an appraiser who might have been through an existing home at some point. And I think, again, it's tough to prescribe. I think it's tough to prescribe how to, when the methods may be wide and varied. The bottom line is the appraiser needs to get comfortable with what they're consuming is reliable and credible. And I certainly wouldn't go any further than any other measure than I would normally take. But if I didn't think it was there and I didn't feel comfortable, that would not be an assignment I think I would feel comfortable completing as a desktop. Annie, did I miss anything?
No, Scott, I agree completely. I mean, I think about Scott and I've been sort of hooking up and looking at reports every day for the last week that have come in. I mean, I looked at one this morning. It had a floor plan from a technology provider. It also included the exterior sketch and dimensions from the tax office, and it was fairly easy to sort of line those up side by side and say, yeah, that makes sense. They both look the same. And oh, by the way, there is a picture of the kitchen, and there's a picture of the living room, and a picture of all the bedrooms, and nothing looked hinky, to get real technical, right? I mean, at some point, I think it's just sort of a common sense. Does this look right? Or is there something, you know, I mean, we've all seen it. I mean, you've done review work. I mean, I've seen in traditional appraisals, a report that said the subject was a 1-story home, but you got a 2-story sketch, right? So, I mean, and I do think there's some discomfort with the technology out there. Appraisers, we've loved our 100-foot reel tapes and our wheels and our lasers, and I think it's going to take a bit for people to get as comfortable with the LiDAR technology as they are with their old tools. And also, I think from, you know, look at it from our perspective, is the LiDAR technology perfect at this point? We'd say no, it's not. We've tested it quite a bit, and it's made tremendous advancements in the last 2 years. But we would also say the same for those tens of millions of reports we have today where the diagram was created by a human. We've compared many reports where we have 2 sketches from 2 different appraisers, and it's pretty significant percentage of them. You look at them and go, did these 2 appraisers look at the same house?
I have a question for Danny about the LiDAR technology. My understanding is that it actually captures everything, you know, in a bookcase or inside drawers, and then you sort of screen it to produce the floor plan. Is that true? And what happens with that data?
I think that is very application specific on how they work.
Okay.
The LiDAR itself is basically just infrared or laser light. I think some of the applications augment that with video. They each take a different approach. So that would be up to the different technologies.
Well, I just want to go on record as saying, I think in the interest of public trust, I mean, I'm a Californian, so I don't really have any concerns about what books are in my bookcase. But if I lived in a conservative state and we were running for school board, I think that really people need to be given informed. They need to grant informed consent, because this data is going to be stored by GSEs, or GSEs can access it. I think it's a huge issue. And if our job is to promote public trust, then we can't act like it's not happening.
No, serious concern. I agree.
Good take,
Hey,
Mark.
can I mention one thing? This is Jeff Bradford. On the LiDAR deal, LiDAR is like your disto, but it's shooting out, instead of 1 point of light, it's shooting out like 20,000 points of light a second. So that's how it's measuring things. It really has no idea what the name of the books are, or any of those kind of things. It's just points. And if you put enough points, kind of like your screen has all these pixels, and it forms a picture. That's the same thing with LiDAR. But LiDAR really doesn't know anything about the book or anything like that. All it knows is that it's a point, and that's it. So the privacy thing really comes when you actually do a video of a property.
Semantics.
Yeah, so it's not LiDAR. LiDAR's measurements. Video is now, that's why you blur people's faces and things like that, right, when you take a picture. But LiDAR has nothing to do, or knows nothing about like books or anything like that.
Okay,
Thanks, Jeff.
well,
Thanks. That's what I was trying to convey when I said that they augment the LiDAR with video. But Jeff was much more clear than I.
Light ranging technology. Ron, I see you kind of waving at the camera. You got a question?
Yeah, my only concern is who's going to use the insurance? My insurance company says they're only willing to 50% me, and the other side's got to do their insurance. What do you think about that? Did you hear me?
Yeah, you mean your liability? Maybe I'm not
Yeah,
following. So you mean if you generate a technology floor plan?
No. I did not go out and look at this stuff. And we got someone who we don't know who it is. And you guys say, well, you get it from this or that. Most of those things, we've kicked those out. We have to, in our county here, 30% of the county, what they measured, 30% of what the county's off. So, I mean, we can just go on, but our E&O insurance companies said, hey, from now, we're only going to be 50% because someone else is doing the other work.
Well,
you got it?
No, I understand the question now. Thank you. And I guess my first reaction, I'll let my other friends.
Well, here, let me share where I got the idea. See this thing? I got this in 19 from McKesson. And that's all it's on is what you guys are talking about. And they've been putting that out since the 2019. And you know, I know this is over your head, so I'm teasing you. I tricked you, but that's what our insurance people are saying. We're not gonna help other people. They're gonna have to get their own insurance.
But I would add that I think that's good news for appraiser.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I've had a lot of conversations with the E&O providers, and I would encourage all the appraisers to have this conversation with your E&O provider. But as I understand it, the two most common causes of action against an appraiser are messing up the square footage and overlooking a serious defect in the property. And from a residential perspective and a desktop appraisal, those are removed from your purview.
Right. Well, there you go.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not liable for those anymore because I'm not doing them. Right. And then the liability for that becomes somebody else's problem. And again, I don't pretend to be an expert in that. I'm just telling you what the E&O companies I've spoken with have indicated to me.
Well, now you got another quiver in your place where you can talk on our side.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two people who have been patiently waiting. Todd Reddington, and then Craig Gilbert,
And then George.
and then George.
And then George. So I don't know how much this is a question other than just an observation, but and I've said this on a couple of blogs, but for those of us that have been in the industry long enough, what is about to take place, what we are being approved and encouraged to do from a hybrid and a desktop perspective was at one time the exact same thing that we were vilified for and taken to court over, and people having these appraisal mills where they would just send a bunch of people out and the appraiser never saw the house, and all these things that occurred that ended up resulting in licensing and FIREA and all these laws, and the appraisers being blamed for everything. And I just find it ironic that one of the major causes of our lack of trustworthiness within the marketplace is now being encouraged to be being done. And I'm just concerned that, you know, history repeats itself in the long term. So that's just my comments about the whole thing. Sorry.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Todd. I saw your post. I did.
I know, and I know Craig did. I know there are a bunch of other people that
You know
saw
I'm
it
in that.
as well.
You know I read that forum. So
I
I would suggest to you there's a very fundamental difference.
Okay.
When it happened before, it happened with deceit and fraud.
Hmm.
And today it's happening with full disclosure. And I think there's a fundamental difference between 15 years ago, I had a firm and I had runners that I was swearing I was inspecting properties that I didn't.
Right.
Versus now I'm saying, no, I didn't inspect it. I relied on this or relied on that. One of those is full disclosure and should promote public trust and limit our unnecessary liability in certain cases, versus one of them is just fraud. Right. So I see the parallel, but I also suggest that maybe there's a real fundamental difference there in that level of disclosure. So,
and I also understand and recognize that we have technologies today that are much more advanced and can vet out or ferret out the issues that, you know, were coming about in those situations. I just found it somewhat ironic that the close correlation. It's not the same. I get it. It's not, but the very close correlation about how history does have a tendency to repeat itself. So that's all. Nice to see everybody. Everybody knows I have to say something or it's not a webinar, right? With Todd.
Okay, Craig, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Hey, thanks, Todd. Thanks for keeping it short. That was an abbreviated discussion. First,
for those that know Todd, he's right.
I'll try to keep mine short. First, I want to thank everybody from Freddie Mac, the speaking, including Sean and Danny. Thank you very much. Susan had a concern about LiDAR, and I saw Jeff Bradford's on. Jeff Bradford's having a webinar that everybody might be interested in next week. It's the 24th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. He's going to have 7 vendors on the webinar that are will be discussing LiDAR and also desktops. So I think it's a good assimilation of everybody all at once. Secondly, I wanted to talk just a little bit about or ask about the UR, AR, the UAD coming up. If there's going to be some alpha testing and beta testing, what the timing might be, and how appraisers might sign up or apply to be an alpha or beta tester, so it gets out there, all the bugs are worked out before it's released, and then hopefully works well. And thanks, George, for doing this. So that's the end of my statements and questions.
Mr. Murphy, you want to field the testing question?
Sure, let me get off mute. So that will be in a number of years. I have to admit, we haven't actually a timeline on our website to display those. If you just go to Freddie Mac UAD, you can see a timeline, and that will be updated as we get closer to the events as this comes out. Our testing phase will probably be around the 2024 range as we look into the future. Since we have to work with multiple industries on this, this is not necessarily set in stone. So it is something that will be changing as we get more closer to the date. But yeah, as that comes about, I imagine we'll be working with vendors and various other entities so that this can be really, the tires can be kicked about it and really is to your liking. I realize we've been working actually with multiple years on various advisories with various people who are in the industry to give us insight into making this a better product. So this is being tested as we speak to make sure it's meeting the needs of the industry. So it's not something that's just being done isolated in a back room at Freddie Mac. It's being worked out with many eyes on it. So, but thank you for the question.
couldn't get it up in time, but we also have a published timeline. Sean, I think this is somewhat up to date through March.
That's correct. Thank you, Danny. Excellent. Yes, that's exactly what we have on our website as well. Appreciate that, Danny.
Okay, well, we're over an hour and a half, so I want to kind of loosen things up here like they've already loosened up. First of all, I would like input from those of you who are still here, which is most of you, on a couple of questions. Help me twist Scott's arm and get him back here maybe later in the year. There's so many topics here, or Sean, or anybody that from Freddie Mac who's allowed to talk. So let us know what topics you'd be interested in, and I'll try to twist their arms and see what we can do. Number one. Number two, we're considering doing some shorter webinars, kind of educational type of stuff. You heard me complain about the incredible cost of improving even a 7-hour class all over the country. It's just prohibitive. And I think it inhibits innovation and modernization just from the cost. So it pays off for everybody else to just regurgitate the same old stuff, and people get their 7 hours and they're gone. One of the thoughts was maybe a 4-hour class/webinar on the market price indexing, kind of an extended example of what I did. Another one is a discussion of this open source software that's available to us. But there would not be for Appraiser CE. We just can't afford it. I don't mind talking here for 2 hours or 4 hours. I love doing it. But the administrative overhead of getting credit for this stuff is just overwhelming. So please give us feedback on what you want, or if you want that. And if you help me get Scott or any of the others, or Danny, I'd love to put Danny on the spot. I love putting Danny on the spot. And Sean, thank you for being here also. Cindy, I guess let's just open. If there's not any more specific questions, let's do that. Otherwise, we can kind of unmute everybody, and it's going to be dangerous because everybody will want to. Basically, I want to end the discussion here. Anybody who'd like to hang out, sometimes you get some of the most valuable information is after the official conference is open. And Scott, if you can hang around for just a few minutes, but feel free to leave. You don't need to say goodbye or just wave, whatever's comfortable for you. Other than that, I'm checking out. I'll be here. I can even do a very brief example in our studio on how to do the price index. Happy to do whatever we can. I think Bruce is still around. Joe's still around. So thank you. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I just want to make a comment with regards to the information that Scott showed, which was helpful about appraiser being hesitant to appraise that market and making conservative adjustments. I appraised in the North Bay area of San Francisco, and we have a crazy market where buyers are essentially jumping ahead of the market. And when we try to measure the market, we call all the pendings, all the contingent listings, and ask them, where's your contract price coming in at, so we can get a gauge as to where prices are. And the problem is most agents will not give you the contract price, which makes sense until they close. So we have to guess, make an estimated guess as where we would say, is it above list price? Is it significantly above list price? So there's a lot of investigative work that you have to do. And you look at the market conditions and you look at your data and you do the best you can in terms of where the market is that's supportable. And then later, we're finding out that people have overbid way beyond the market, like $120,000 over the list price. Those are the kind of insane market we're seeing. So I just want to comment that it may not be because appraisers are hesitant or want to make conservative adjustments. It's just the reality of the market makes it so hard for us to predict where the market is right now when we don't have data available to us.
That is great feedback, and that's a great comment. And really, tying all the way back to the article, and George and I talked about this a few times. What I was trying to do, and I know, and what am I trying to say? I'm old enough to know what I don't know. So I know that appraisers, by and large, aren't doing anything at all. So you articulate, in my view, the challenge of someone who's really trying. you're going beyond, you're going into listing data where you can grab information. If there's anything you can quantify, you're going to grab a hold of it. And for everything you mentioned, there's hesitancy, and I get that and understand that. And the premise of our piece was just to get the appraisers to do something, right? The 20% that we're doing something, and we were seeing the patterns we were seeing, very high level, just to say, you know, we can't just swag these adjustments, make them up, struggle with, you know, again, all the things we've talked about, struggle with the fact that closed sales are going to lag. Be out there and try to get a measure, and there's ways to do it now. You happen to be, from my understanding, in an always been a crazy market going back many, many years. And particularly in peak times, I can't imagine how hard it is to appraise. So it's a point well taken, and I understand that.
Thank you.
I can mention on that, actually, it came up in the webinar that we did with Craig Gilbert. I mean, it is possible to trend your list price sale price ratio. Now, does it give you the exact sale contract price that it's going to go for? No. But what's important about market analysis, market trending? It's a trend. And certainly recently we've seen where list prices sale prices were above list prices. Now that's important information. It's huge. Or vice versa. Normally the sale price is below the list price, but it gives you a trend. And you can look at that trend line. It takes 30 seconds to graph it, and it tells you everything that's going on in a market segment.
Well, that's great response, George, because it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's, you've done something. I mean, that's compared to the vacuous silence that, you know, you get on most reports. So, and there's appraisers. I follow an appraiser in Michigan, and she does a great job with capturing all those little, you know, nuanced movements between contract to list and list to close. And yeah, there's ways that you can capture it.
Just wanted to jump in real quick for those people that use a la mode before you get off of the program or off the webinar here. When we're talking about making adjustments on a, you know, percentage versus a daily basis, I know that within the program itself, or within the spreadsheet itself, it doesn't, or the form itself, it doesn't allow you to make adjustments other than making percentage. But if you utilize the spreadsheet down below, you can create a formula in there that will allow you to calculate the daily rate, and then also to apply it to each one of the comparables and link it up into your form. So if you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, contact a la mode or your provider or whatever, whoever it might be. I'm just familiar with a la mode. Contact your provider and ask them if they've got a webinar or something online that can show you how to utilize linking cells to the spreadsheet program. And that will, if you can create yourself a spreadsheet down there and just pop your pending dates in, you will literally be bringing on a daily basis that market conditions adjustment all the way up to the day of value on a daily rate. And that can sometimes be very helpful, especially when we're talking about sales that occurred at the beginning of the month versus the end of the month, and how it relates to your data value. So that's just my suggestion.
I think Todd just volunteered to handle everybody individually, to show them one-on-one, personally.
You heard, Howard?
So I've got a couple of people who've raised their hands. Robin.
Just want to respond real quick to Howard. The reason Howard's giving me a hard time because I told him to switch it, to move his camera so we could see his face, and I promised the Trojan would beat Miami today, and they're not.
Okay, hi, this is Robin. I tried to type this question because I'm shy, but I got told to say it out loud. So this is for Scott, I think. And I think it pertains to desktops, but maybe it's hybrids. Anyhow, in a forum that I follow, there's a lot of confusion from the customers, the borrowers, when these data collectors are going in with the new technology, I think, maybe not, but data collectors are going in, and then the appraiser calls to schedule the appointment, and the borrower thinks we've already been in as appraisers. Will there be a concerted effort to educate the lenders that they must explain to the borrower that there's going to be more than one person now coming to their home? Because the public is trusting less and less when unexpected people are calling.
It's interesting. So that's if I'm following, it's an unintended consequence to the industry trying to source it at the time of the order, which wasn't our intent. So you're saying you could have a third party or someone go out, get this measurement, and now for some other reason, the appraiser needs to upgrade and to a traditional assignment and schedule an appointment to walk through?
That is what I've been hearing, yes.
I don't know, Danny, you got a reaction?
I got a reaction of, I don't understand. In the desktop, there's no need for anyone to come out. In the hybrid, once the property data collection is done, there's no need for the appraiser to go out in the great majority of cases.
Okay, as you speak, it sounds like there's some confusion with the lenders when they're ordering as to what
Well,
exactly they need.
The only thing I can think of, it is becoming quite common. I mean, I'm speaking to you from my spacious condo that I have across from the office in Freddie Mac headquarters. And when I bought this place, I know Scott got tired of me showing him the 3D scan floor plan. But one of the things happening is a lot of the agents now are sort of getting them pre-inspected when they list, but I don't know how anybody would confuse that with the appraiser. Haven't really heard that feedback, but I'm gonna dig into that because I don't see, in the case of, again, desktop, no inspection needed, hybrid still should only be one inspection. So
Okay, that makes sense. And again, it's not my personal experience. I'm still a trainee appraiser, and I'm hearing this in a forum.
Okay.
So,
yeah, we'll look into that though. Thank you. Good feedback.
Good for you.
This is Lou. If I could interject a question with regards to that. In areas where there are a lot of rural properties or properties with different kinds of views, I'm just curious, what are the guidelines where a GSE would say or allow a desktop to be done? Because I'm not sure if interior video would capture all the dominant features of a property that drives the value if you do a desktop. So I was just curious how you guys are handling that.
You're saying on a unique property where you're suggesting a desktop might not.
Yeah, I mean, in areas where I would say in my area, probably 80% of work I do are rural properties, acreage, views, hillside, quality differences. So I'm just curious, under what parameters would you consider a desktop to be appropriate appraisal tool to be used?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that, and the second one's easy. The first piece is the eligibility is going to be assessed by our system. So that does the eligibility check, whether the loan is eligible. And then I think the second piece for the appraiser, and really just being honest, not being smug, is that's in the appraiser's hands. If you have that property and somehow comes across your desk, if I understand it, and it's desktop eligible, and you react to tell them what you just told me, then that doesn't feel like that may qualify because of the unique or complex nature of the property for a desktop assignment. You may feel more comfortable or need to get in. And if I'm the appraiser, that would be the message that I would deliver.
Scott, real quick, and I'm gonna jump on top of her question with that. Okay, so now let's say Lord says, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. I apologize, but
you did correct.
Okay, Lord, if she says if a client calls her and says, we want you to do this desktop, and she comes to the conclusion that, you know what, I can't do it from a desktop perspective, it needs to be done as a full appraisal, then that client within the system itself, is there a way to record the fact that Lourdes has stated that it needs to be done as a full, or is that client then free to go and contact 4 other appraisers and keep trying until they find somebody that will do it as a desktop? Is there any sort of backstop with that where, and there's going to be 2 sides to that. There's going to be the appraiser that will say, it's going to be an extreme case where I will ever do a desktop appraisal. And then there's the other case where I will do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. And so there's got to be a balance, and I understand that. But at what point do you say, okay, you can ask 5 appraisers if they'll do a desktop, and if they all say it needs to be a full, then you have to order a full. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand the question. I can't speak to the order and fulfillment systems, Todd. It's a fair question, but I don't know, and I think what you're trying to get in front of is the, not the dialing for dollars. I don't know what the right term is. You're going to keep going down the list till you get somebody that's, I don't know how that works operationally on the other side. I really don't. We're trying to empower the appraiser to make the decision. Question. I think if you can't do it, you can't do it. And it's not the intent for the lender, the AMC, anybody else managing that order just to go, well, she's being difficult. I'm going to go to Todd. Then I'm going to go to Scott. Then I'm going to go to Barry. Then I'm going to go, go right down the list. I don't know.
Hey,
I mean, to be
Scott,
fair,
Go ahead, Howard.
it's Howard. I want to jump in here. I mean, the reality is the skill level of appraisers and their geographic competency are going to drive that issue. There are going to be some appraisers who can perform desktop assignments on certain properties, in certain markets, and in certain areas far more easily than others.
This is George. We've had a couple of people. We've had a couple of people that hands up patiently, and I'd like to give them a chance. Also, I want to recognize Jason Tolima. They've had me out there a couple of times teaching a class. So, Cindy, could you handle? Let's take care of the people with their hands up. They've been patient and tolerant.
George, before that, I really want to jump
that's
in
fine. Go
though
ahead.
on Howard's because
Please.
I think this is a very important point. The GSE forms, including the 1004 desktop 70D, when you sign that, you're swearing that you've appraised in that neighborhood before. Right. And I know when I was at an AMC, we would have appraisers who were perfectly willing to go to, some remote area they'd never been to before. And then I go, well, how are you going to truthfully sign the certification? Right. This is part of why those requirements are in there, so that if you get that unique view situation, that the local appraiser knows, oh, wait a minute, this is something I really have to check this view out. It's not really something that should be done with the desktop. Right. And that's why those requirements are in there, that when you do work for either of the GSEs, when you sign your name there, that's part of what you're signing and swearing to, that you've done a property like this in this neighborhood before. It is sort of how we say, swear that you're geographically competent, basically. Sorry.
Go ahead, George. Who do you want to hand it off to?
Brian Brooks has got his hand up.
So the GSEs, I think we're most useful in the office doing analysis, it seems like. So in the era of like Google Maps and Google Earth, what are your thoughts on still driving by every comparable and getting a photo? I know the scope of work embedded in the form says we've inspected the comparable from the street, and that's quite a time consuming thing. So I just wanted to hear what you had to say about that. And go Spartans.
I'm a Big Ten guy, but I'm not a Spartan, but I do like the Spartans. So go Sparty. I'll answer. And then, Danny has many years, as does Sean and others. I think to the requirement, Brian, to drive by the comps, I don't think I've read at all on that form that it has to be at that moment concurrent and contemporaneous with the assignment that you have to do it. I think if you've been by that sale, if you've been in that area, if you've been by those comps and you're comfortable signing your name, then to me, that's, as long as it's current and the appraiser is the one that determines that. It just can't be, you've never been on the street and there you go. So I think that also plays into, some of the spirit of the desktop. And was there a second point to your question? I'm trying to remember.
Well, just, the GSEs that just pretty much require the photo and driving by at some point. It's just time consuming, and it very rarely matters in my experience. Of course it does it a few times, but it normally doesn't matter a whole lot.
Look, so I would say to that, for the subset of everything you might do in your practice, if a portion of it can be desktop and save you that time, again, that was tying all the way back to why'd you introduce the desktop? I think part of it was the spirit was to save some turn time and bring in some efficiency and potentially maybe some cost efficiency to the process. And that also doesn't suggest the appraiser never leaves the desk, in my view, too. I think there's a lot of benefit appraisers have by knowing their market, and I think they'll wind up doing a cross section of desktop and hybrid work eventually, and then maybe full appraisal work where they're out enough. But again, I think, we saw in some of the early turn time metrics during the COVID flexibilities, appraisers seemed to behave like they liked these and got them out quick because they were able to do them and pick up that efficiency, maybe to the point you're suggesting.
John's got his.
John Ferris, you're up.
Okay, I'm up. So did Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac ever consider just changing some of the certifications on the 1004s that requires me to inspect a property? I mean, if you want to speed up in inspection times and speed up the whole process, that little certification in there has always troubled me, because I would love to just train my own inspector the way I want the property inspected. He can go out and do the inspections, take all the photos, see all the comps, send it back to me, and I can do the important part, which is the market analysis, and do all the desktop work, and that will speed up my production tenfold. Well, okay, not tenfold, probably not 10, but I might be able to double my production, which, right now is pretty good. I do over 500 appraisals a year. So if I could have someone out there doing inspections for me, I can speed that up even faster and still get you a quality product without having to worry about this whole desktop situation where I'm trying to get someone else to provide me a floor plan, which then I have to verify the sketching, which in my county, the assessor does not provide sketches unless it is in a written request by the homeowner. So I'm kind of out of luck there. If the floor plan I get doesn't have any sketch information on it, I'm going to have to turn down almost everything if I can't get that information. So I'm still going to have to send someone else out there to go get it for me. So I don't really see any sort of increase in production time on my end.
Yeah, I'd say I understand the question. I just don't know that. So to the latter, the whole reason the desktop and hybrid, the former has been recently released and the latter's in test and learn, are to address the very problem, in my view, you articulated. I don't, why do I have to go out to the property, or I can send somebody out there? Those are both examples of the desktop. You do not need to go to the property. And with the hybrid, as it's being tested, there will be someone else that will collect that for you. And to your former first issue, unless I missed it, I mean, that sounds like a trainee supervisor situation today that could be supported by the Form 70. You send your person out that you're comfortable with, that you've trained, depending on the state you're in, if it allows it. They sign on the left, you sign on the right, and that's it with the existing old archaic form that we have now that we're using. So
yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a certified appraiser, so I can't have a trainee, even though I have 20 years of experience and do thousands of appraisals. I'm not competent for a trainee, apparently.
I understand.
If there are no other questions, I just want to mention, or maybe consider, that the biggest, I would say, resistance of appraisers with the desktop and the hybrid is the liability issue, relying on a third party to obtain raw data for you. And, there's a lot to be said. I've been doing this for 30 years, that you observe a lot of things when you walk through the home, and outside and around it, what's around it, what's behind the fence, etc. And if there's a way that hurdle can be overcome, like, for instance, it's something to be considered when looking at it by the lender, is that if we can train our own people to become the eyes and hands and feet of us going out in the field, we know how they look at things because we've trained them. And to give appraisers the option, instead of a lender saying, oh, well, we've contracted all inspections to be done by XYZ company, so they're going to go out there. So the question I have as an appraiser, what if I see something on the photos, on the videos, I want more information about it? Will I be able to contact the people who are out there, or did they just leave a machine and walked out of the door? Those are kind of the specific nitty-gritty details that appraisers have questions on. I'm I'm aging, so I welcome the desktop and all this other stuff. And we are appraisers in our area are all aging. So that's something that we want to embrace. But we have this real serious question about liability. I think it was Sean that mentioned that since we're not taking the measurements, we're not liable. But if our name is on that piece of paper, if a customer sues somebody for incorrect square footage, they're going to sue us too by association. And all those things I'm saying is that if somehow we can consider all those concerns that appraisers have and come up with something that's workable for everybody, then we would have a product that appraisers would embrace, I think. I don't know if that's, makes sense, but I'm just trying to say, here are the things that we're worried about. Can we address those somehow?
So I want to suggest something. The hybrid product itself is not new. The company I worked at before I came to Freddie Mac had been doing hybrids for 15 years.
Okay.
Did we have complaints filed against appraisers over those things? Yes, we did. We never had a single one that was successful. And we did hundreds of them every day for 15 years. And actually, again, as I suggested earlier, we felt like we had less liability because we said right up front, we didn't measure this property personally. We didn't inspect it personally. And so if there are some things in there, we're not responsible for that because we didn't do it. And then if you look at the new forms, I'm reading some of the assumptions in our hybrid and desktop form. I have them up on the screen here, right? And we're trying to make it very clear. We tried to really protect the appraiser. The appraiser assumes there's no material emissions and makes no guarantees, expressed or implied, regarding the accuracy of the third-party data. Right? The disclosures are in there. In fact, I'll tell you a little story. A friend of mine was in a Facebook group and somebody said, well, let's have a contest to find the best disclaimer that we can put in this new desktop report. And this friend of mine posted a disclaimer and everybody loved it and said, oh, that's great. Can I copy it? Can I copy it? Can I copy it? And he said, well, sure. But what I posted was what's on the form. Right. So what's, I think one of the first things I always did as an appraiser when a new form came down is I would sit down and read all the assumptions and limiting conditions. So I knew when I sign this,
Right.
what am I buying?
Certifications.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if people will read through that, they'll see that we really have tried to put the language in there that, that they hopes in there. So anyway, I have to run, but it's been a great pleasure being with everybody today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
Great job, Scott.
We got one person with their hand up. Ed.
Yeah, this was just a question for Danny. Danny, if a desktop comes on over to us and in that report, we see a photo with a physical deficiency, significant, that's a hard stop, obviously, correct?
Well, we expect you to address it like you would in any appraisal, right? Yeah. I'll tell you a funny one, and Scott will remember this, and Sean too, because we had a QC meeting and during the COVID flexibilities. We got a desktop appraisal, and the appraiser took the photos from the MLS and put them in there, but apparently didn't look at those photos because they clearly showed that the ceiling in the kitchen had collapsed. Right. And so we all had a good laugh at that. Yeah, it's not just enough to have the photos. We actually want you to look at them. Right. Oh, and back to the last, I would say too, we don't send untrained people out. This Uber driver pizza delivery thing is, I get so mad about that because we have very specific training instructions. And it's very common if the appraiser has a question that they do contact the property data collector. There's a lot of myths out there that, oh, I don't even know who this is and I won't be able to contact them. And yet in the hybrid test and learns we've done, and even at the company I worked at before, that was a very common thing, right? So, and with that, I really do have to go. Good question, Ed. Thanks.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for everybody who's been here.
Thank
We'll
you.
bring us to a formal close. Anybody wants to hang around afterwards, but somehow we've got to put an end to this. Scott, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Scott.
Yes.
Have a good
So,
evening.
We're teaching online starting April 15th, Stats and Graphs 1. Y'all have a coupon for $30 off in your email because you signed up for this. So please be sure and join us. Make use of it. Take
Thank
this and
y'all.
run with it.